Hey guys, this is the first time I am posting on the subreddit, and it's all due to certain discussion with my bestie yesterday. Let's take it from the start. So yesterday at night, me and my bestie were chatting and discussing certain topics, primarily horror, as both of us are horror fanatics. She then suddenly asked me a question. Do you recall ever getting an ominous vibe from a person whom you just met? Now this got me thinking for some time, when suddenly a face popped up in my mind. This was a face that I have not recalled in the past 3 years, so just visualizing it gave me the creeps. And along with the face came the incident associated with it. This post is regarding that specific incident. This incident took place when I was in the first year of my college life. Back then, I just started my daily journey from my home to the college, which usually consisted of a train and metro ride per round trip. As it was during the initial phase of my college experience, I was not familiar with that many people in my college, and all my new college friends lived afar and nowhere near my daily route, so I always used to travel alone. Also, being an introvert, I neither had the interest nor the confidence to convert relative strangers into friends, so I was accustomed to traveling alone and minding my own business. One afternoon, while I was returning home by the metro, as usual, a guy suddenly approached me with a college-specific question. I was a bit taken aback, as it was so sudden, yet I replied as normally and politely as I could to his questions. The guy was dressed in a normal attire, t-shirt and jeans, and he looked decent as well. He introduced himself as James and said that he was a first-year student of my college as well. Then he started chatting with me about matters other than that, and I replied with as much enthusiasm as I could muster at that moment. Nothing in his words or attire was alarming, yet I felt that something was off. The feeling was unexplainable yet unavoidable. After chatting a bit more, he realized that his station was next, so he went up from his seat and said that he really enjoyed this conversation and he would really like to continue talking with me, so if I could give him my number. I felt really hesitant at first, but firstly, I really didn't want to offend the guy by saying that I was getting a weird vibe from him, and secondly, it somehow felt nice seeing someone that was this impressed with me on the first meeting itself, but this was really stupid on my part. So I proceeded to give him my real name and number, and we parted ways. After that day, we started chatting by text, and as the days passed, the weird vibe started getting stronger on my part. James started off normal with his texts, goofy, funny, and lighthearted. But as the days passed, he started getting a bit more aggressive with his demand that he wants to meet up again. Now, before people start having misconceptions, I want to clarify that I am a guy, so this is a lot more weird for me to experience. He repeatedly started texting that he wants me to come to faraway places so that we can hang out. Now, at first, I was not interested because the places were really far from where I lived, so I used to politely decline, saying that I am really busy right now. But after a point of time, he started asking me about a specific date on which I would be free. I was not really interested in this conversation anymore, so I gave him a random date into the future, and the conversation ended for that day. And would you know it, when the date actually arrived, I got a text on my phone asking me if I remember my promise to meet up, with the name of another faraway place and the time when he expects me to arrive there and catch up with him. This was literally the last straw for me, and I blocked his number and also blocked him from Facebook, where he accidentally found me while scurrying through his newsfeed one day and sent me a friend request. I truly thought this was the end of the story, but nope. 3 to 4 days after I blocked him, I was outside the house doing some shopping. I had to walk long distances, searching for certain products and items, so I was totally spent after an hour, sweaty and panting a lot. as it was really hot and the sun was scorching. Hence, I decided to rest for some time and was standing at the side of the road. Meanwhile, I noticed that two guys were coming towards me from the other end of the road. They looked as if they were searching for something or someone, but were confused as to where they would be able to find it. Seeing me standing there without purpose, they approached me and asked me if I knew where XYZ location is. I pointed to the direction where the location was, according to my knowledge, and they seemed happy and content with my answer. I don't know what it is with some people, but they start to get too comfortable and friendly after they complete their agenda, and these guys were no exception. They started asking me my name, where I lived, the name of my college, my personal size down there, but, that's when it got really weird. They also started sharing stuff about themselves, like how they run a computer learning program, how they were scouting interesting applicants, how many hurdles they had to overcome to reach where they are now, and all that. After both of them blabbered for many minutes simultaneously, they stopped to gather their breath and asked me for their answers to their questions, which I didn't even get an opportunity to give earlier. If this happened now, I would have given them fake names and address, but back then, I was not careful or worried enough, so I provided them with my real name, college name, the year I'm in, which I'm studying, the area I lived, etc. After listening to my college name and years of study, they seemed to have like a eureka moment suddenly. They stated that one of their longtime students also studies in the same college and is also in his first year. Their student's name was James. I know what you guys are thinking. Maybe it's another person with the same name. It's not that uncommon. But no, it was the same guy. The same name, the same surname. It was him, no doubt. My heart shrank after I heard the name. I started sweating profusely. My mind activated the fight or flight response, so I really felt like running away, but stopped myself because it was a crowded street and running away felt really weird. So I stood there, shocked to my core, unable to speak or listen as the sound of my heart clouded everything. I'm thinking, how can this be happening? How is this possible? This is too absurd and improbable to be a coincidence. All these thoughts were running around in my head as their voices seemed as if playing on in the distance, although they were right there, standing in front of me. A sudden fear gripped me. What if they call him and ask me to speak with him? What if they say, James's house is nearby? So why don't you come with us to his house? You guys can meet and become friends. My heart pounded harder and harder, anticipating these two questions from their end. But thankfully they didn't ask any of them, although they were particularly insistent that I take his number from them. They tried to give me his number many times, but each time I politely refused. So, after a point of time, they thanked me for my help and took their leave, and I took a humongous sigh of relief. The incident ends here, but not necessarily the creepiness. After finishing my story, my bestie remarked that this was one of the scariest stories she has heard in a while, and the fact that it was 2 a.m. and then didn't necessarily help to subside the uneasiness. I recalled this story after 3 years, so I've forgotten many details regarding it. Still, certain details crept up in my head while narrating the story. Firstly, in all the years I've been to college, I've never seen that guy again. My college was very strict, and it was actually really strict regarding attendance, so I had to go to college every day, sometimes even 6 times a week, and still I haven't seen him even once afterwards. Additionally, I've spent a lot of time in the class where he apparently studied, as I had some friends there, and yet not once. Secondly, as I mentioned before, I blocked this guy from all social media platforms and also blocked his number, and I was relieved to see that the guy was still present in my block list. Otherwise, I would have lost my mind. However, when my bestie tried to search for this guy on those aforementioned platforms, she couldn't find him, and she searched from top to bottom. and I'm not willing to unblock him to satisfy my curiosity. It's been almost a week since I've had the discussion with my bestie, and both of us are still nowhere near to explaining how any of that was even possible. But I truly know one thing. This is the creepiest thing that has ever happened with me, and I don't think anything will top this in the future. When I was 10, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit, and we decided we wanted to go to the YMCA for the day. My grandmother dropped us off and said she would come and pick us up in 4 hours. On that day, the YMCA was empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's it. We went to the basketball court, and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this YMCA had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was empty, except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour, there wasn't much left to do, and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting, so we decided to play a game of seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end, near the clock on the wall, so we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we just stuck our heads face down in the water. We did this a couple of times, and I was winning. On our last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I won, but instead, it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off, or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool, we figured we would get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother picked us up. We only had an hour left anyways, and the water was freezing. As we got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so of course, we were super excited that she allowed us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock, probably to help make sure you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door, you could clearly see it. She followed us in and went over to the thermometer encased in plastic and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured that she must have to turn it on each time, so I didn't think anything of it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls, so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I know she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I thought I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and decided we should get out in 10 or 15 minutes. It was already plenty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt nice because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes, it was starting to get a little bit too hot though, and my cousin agreed that we should leave so we can get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, but it wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening. And then I let my cousin try. She couldn't get it open either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes, so we sat back down and waited. The room was getting hotter now too, and I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door and shaking and twisting the knob, trying to get the lifeguard's attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I didn't think there's any way that she couldn't have noticed or heard these two little girls banging and kicking the door and screaming. Now, we had been in there for about 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My eyes and skin were burning. We sat back down and put our towels over our heads because they were a little damp and it made it easier to breathe. I was so worried about my cousin, as she is a couple of years younger than me. I looked at the clock and saw that we had been in there for 35 minutes now. I got up and walked to the door again. saw the lifeguard still just staring straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming that we needed out and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still, nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy, so I went to go sit back down, but the wooden seats of the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so that they didn't burn as bad, but I could still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped a little bit. My cousin was laying face down with a towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure that she was still okay. And she was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out of there soon, because she seemed a little bit disorientated. It had been 45 minutes now, and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way that the lifeguard would forget that we were in there, and I thought she would have to come back soon, but there was a little voice in my head telling me that maybe she purposely locked us in there. Finally, a man walked past the door towards the pool, but for some reason, I just couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire and I felt so dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to be let into the sauna and came back with a lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now that for sure she had locked us in there because she pulled out her keys to unlock the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there any longer, so as the man was trying to walk in, I was trying to shove our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguard started trying to shut the door and push us back with it. The man was clearly confused about what was going on and said, I think I want out, and I think they want out. The lifeguard let out a sigh and opened the door fully, and we ran away as fast as we could into the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes before my grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken by what had just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or on the car ride home as well. When we got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner, and I told them the story of what just happened. They thought I must have been exaggerating, and honestly, they didn't believe me. I truly think that the woman was going to let us cook alive in there. The only bit of doubt that I have is what would have happened if we actually died. She obviously would have gotten the blame. What was her endgame? I'm 21 now, but I think about this interaction all the time. And when I'm in small spaces or I get too warm, I still have panic attacks. No one believes this story, and I get it. It's pretty absurd. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for opinions, but do you think that this could have been some crazy misunderstanding? Or do you think that she really just left us in there to die? And why? So, to the lifeguard at the YMCA, please, let's not meet again. I'm a girl. My mom was a horrible addict. She barely took care of me as a kid. At the time of this incident, I was around 6 or 7, so my awareness and understanding of things happening may not totally make much sense, but this happened in the 90s. One night, my mother and I were on a car ride. I wasn't sure why we were driving, but it was late at night. I'm not sure what time it was, but I assume it was really late because there weren't many cars on the street, and I was sleeping in the back seat. I don't even remember getting in my car. My mom drove up to some sketchy house and left me in the car for what felt like forever. Suddenly, the car door swung open, and someone violently grabbed me by my arm and yanked me out of the car. I started screaming and crying until the man that grabbed me looked in my eyes and said, "Be quiet, and don't try to run or I'll kill you." He had a scruffy beard and looked like a madman. I was scared to death, so I listened. He held me tight by my arm, shut the car door, and walked with me down the street. I looked back at the house my mom was in, hoping that my mom would come out at the last second and save me. I looked at the house as long as I could, as the man dragged me further and further away. As we walked down the street, I wanted to cry, but I was in shock and in fear. I didn't know what to do. If I sniffled or cried, the man would tighten his grip and yell at me. I can't even explain how scared and confused I was. We walked for a little while and ended up in the projects. The projects were a bunch of buildings crammed together in a crappy neighborhood. We walked into one of those buildings and walked up a flight of stairs. My legs and feet hurt like heck, but I was too scared to stop moving or complain. We walked up another flight of stairs when I saw some random guy smoking a cigarette in the stairway. Then, without warning, the guy that kidnapped me fell to the ground. It happened so fast. I didn't know how the kidnapper fell to the ground so fast, but the next thing I remember is the cigarette guy was punching and kicking the kidnapper in the head and face. The kidnapper was out cold. The cigarette guy picked up the kidnapper by the back of his jacket and threw him down the stairs. You have no idea how scary and violent it is to see an unconscious man fall down the stairs. To this day, I still have a fear of falling downstairs. He bled everywhere. I still have no idea how cigarette guy knew to help me, but I'm glad he did. Maybe he could see tears in my eyes. Maybe he just picked up on something and had a bad vibe, but he acted instantly. The first second he could, he attacked my would-be kidnapper. Cigarette guy starts pacing back and forth, swearing at himself, gritting his teeth and clenching his fists. I thought he was mad at me, so I started to cry. He looked at me and said, Okay, shut up. He had an attitude, so I listened to him out of fear. I wasn't as scared of cigarette guy as much as I was of the bearded guy, but I was still in fear of him. He started to ask me questions with an attitude. Why are you out this late? Where are your parents? Why would you talk to strangers? I was in so much shock and confusion, I couldn't answer the man's questions correctly. He asked if I knew my way home, and I told him I didn't. I told him a broken story about what happened, and somehow with the information I gave him, he knew where my mom's car was. The only thing I remember about the road is passing a house with Christmas lights on, despite Christmas already being over. I think he knew the area well enough and figured out where I needed to go from that information, but I honestly don't even remember telling him about the Christmas lights. Anyways, he told me he would take me back if I promised over and over that I wouldn't tell the police that I saw him or anyone that looked like him, and made me promise that I wouldn't even tell the police anything. He had an attitude. I didn't care what he asked me, so I just wanted to go back to my mom. So I agreed. I followed him down the stairs. The bearded guy was still laying on the ground, bleeding at the bottom of the stairs that cigarette guy threw him down. He wasn't moving at all. For all I know, he was dead, and I hope now that he was. Cigarette guy stepped over the bearded guy, and I followed. We walked outside, and cigarette guy looked around panicky. I remember him telling me, the police don't like me. We walked out the projects, and my feet still hurt. Cigarette guy was walking fast in a panic, and I had to basically jog to keep up with him. I started crying, and he asked me what was wrong. I told him my feet hurt, and I remember him sucking his teeth and picking me up with an attitude. He awkwardly cradled me in both arms. We walked down the road for a moment. Then, I remember him swearing and running behind a house or a building. A cop car was driving down the road. He put me down and told me to run to the police car. I tried to run, but my legs could barely move, and I was scared. The cop car kept driving and rode away without seeing me before I could even get remotely close to it. He kept swearing to himself as he picked me up again and ran down the street. He took me behind a lot of houses and hid from every cop car that drove by. I assumed now that the police were looking for me. He carried me in both arms, running fast down the road, when I saw my mom at her car in the distance. She was surrounded by police. Cigarette guy put me down and told me to run to the police. I got so excited, the pain in my legs disappeared. He put me down and ran away. I ran towards the police and my mom. My mom picked me up and hugged me tight. The police started to ask me and my mom questions. I don't remember too much about the questions, but I remember my mom telling the police some convoluted story that just didn't make any sense. She basically told me to not say anything, and I didn't say much, but cried a whole bunch. We went home. Days later, my dad picked me up and knew something was wrong. I told him everything. I never lived with my mom again after that. When I grew up and had time to think about that day, I never forgave my mother. Not too long ago, I asked my dad what he remembers about the situation, and he told me what he thinks happened from what I explained to him from years ago. He said my mom was on a drug binge. I got kidnapped, someone saved me, but the person that saved me had warrants. I wasn't mad at me, he was just frustrated with the situation that he had to now deal with. Imagine being a criminal on the run, and now you have a kidnapped girl with you, and you just beat up a guy half to death. If he would have gotten caught with me, he could be in jail for my kidnapping. With my mom lying and me being in shock and confused, I wouldn't be able to tell them that the man helped me, because while it was all happening, I didn't even notice he was helping me. To the man that saved me, thank you. To the man that tried to kidnap me, let's not meet. So this happened 2 nights ago, so I'm still replaying it over and over in my head. I thought this would be a good place to share. I'm a pretty predictable person with a predictable schedule, so I'm not sure if there was a sudden occurrence or if someone knew my nightly routine. I'm a 35-year-old woman. My husband Rob gets up for work hours long before me, so he goes to bed before I do. I usually get to bed a few hours after he does, around the same time every night. I turn off the lights and TV in the living room and take my dog to the back door to let her out. She's tiny, old, and poses zero threat to anyone. The door leads to a large deck outside. Off to the right of the deck is a few steps down and a small path to the gate, which we always keep chained and locked. Every single night before opening the door, I peek out the window right next to it without disturbing the blinds and flip on the deck light. I never expect anyone to be there, and we've never had a problem with anyone trespassing or trying to break in. It's just something I do every night, kind of like peeking behind the shower curtain before I pee. I know no one is back there, but if I don't check, then that's going to be the one time that there actually is someone hiding there, you know? Hey, I watch a ton of horror movies and it's pitch black outside at night where I live. So a few nights ago, I got ready for bed, went to the back door with my dog slowly following behind me, and peeked out the window. I flipped on the light. My heart jumped into my throat when I saw a skinny, dirty guy in his 30s or 40s standing off to the side of the house, facing it. I see him raise his arm up and hold a screwdriver above his head as soon as the light went on. Preparing for someone to open the door, I screamed, "Rob, get up! Get the gun!" as loud as I could, which startled the guy, and he jumped over the rail of the deck, even though he was right next to the stairs, and ran. My husband ran out of our bedroom with his gun. He called the police, and they showed up within 5 minutes. They drove around trying to find the guy, but no luck. The guy broke the lock on our gate to get in. He also pried open the back screen door, which we always keep locked as well. If I would have opened the door without looking out first, I might be dead. I don't know if I caught the guy trying to break in or if he was waiting for me to open the door like I do every night. Either way, it was so terrifying. My parents are buying us security cameras for the outside this week as an early birthday present for Rob, but I'm still terrified.